Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, and welcome to Prog Chattery 777. Well, we're nearing the end of our long-winded conversation on the albums of Rush with their 18th studio album, Snakes and Arrows, released in 2007. And I've got some fond memories of this album because I did see them twice on this tour. I saw them once in 2007 and once in 2008. So I know the songs off the album quite well. They played a lot of the songs from this album on that tour. It is, of course, the second album after the reunion and the follow-up to Vapor Trails. And Snakes and Arrows, I think, is a very different album from Vapor Trails. That, Vapor Trails captures this really raw, sort of visceral energy. There's almost a reckless abandon to the sound of Vapor Trails. And I think a lot of that has to do with the excitement of the band first getting back together again, and the fact that the songs on Vapor Trails, a lot of them anyway, were constructed from these improvised jams, and they would take little bits and pieces of all these improvs and slice them together, and they created the songs that way, which is brilliant because, like I said, it captures that raw sort of visceral energy. And that's really not the case with Snakes and Arrows. Snakes and Arrows is a much more grounded album, I think. Because the songs, I think most of the songs on here anyway were, fully written and arranged before going into the studio. So by the time we get the final, versions of all these songs, they've been very much, refined and honed down to, that perfect sweet spot. So in that sense, it's more of a traditional album in that regard, which is great. The real headline with this album for me, I think, though, is the songs themselves. It's not necessarily a case where, these are, my favorite Rush songs ever on this album. But I will say that this is probably the best display of Rush's talents as songwriters. It's songwriting in the traditional sense, where you get, 3 to 5 chords, a strong set of lyrics, a catchy melody, and a strong hook. That's something that Rush, obviously they've been songwriters way back to the beginning in the mid-70s, but I think they really started taking that craft of songwriting seriously towards the end of the 80s, and it had been just a steady progression until then. And I think this really represents the apex of their, songwriting ability in the purest sense. Because there's some really great songs on here. There's some great melodies and some great choruses, and I think part of the reason that the songs are so well showcased too is the production. It does sound very, very nice. There's a great blend of acoustic guitar and heavy guitar, and so there's, in a way, that kind of makes it a little retro. The producer, Nick Rescue something, I always fail to pronounce his last name, but the producer for this album did say that he feels it's got a sound reminiscent of 2012, The Farewell to Kings, and Hemispheres. And I agree with that in terms of the sound palette, because it does have that more traditional acoustic guitar, heavy rock blend, which is, reminiscent of those albums. But it's not proggy like those albums. It is more about the songs, and that's it, and that's great. Like I said, there's some great moments on here, and like I said, some of Rush's best simpler songs, but it's not all simple. There's a whole lot of other stuff on the album as well. We get 3 instrumentals, which I think is really cool, actually. Typically, we would get 1 Rush instrumental per album, and even that was a very sporadic thing. There's only a couple back in the 70s heyday, and then they kind of got back into it in the 90s, and doing 1 instrumental on an album, but we get 3 on here. 1 is kind of a more traditional Rush instrumental, and then 2 are much shorter, but we'll talk more about those when we get to the tracks. If there is a criticism to be made with the album, I'd say the best songs are very much concentrated towards the beginning of the album, so it's a little bit of a two-sided album in that regard, but that's a minor criticism. It's not saying that the songs towards the end of the album, aren't good. They're just not as good as, the first few. But that's fine. That is kind of a thing with, that became a thing with some of the Rush albums anyway. I'm thinking, Test for Echo and Counterparts and that. And that's an interesting thing too, with regard to Test for Echo and Counterparts. They're great albums, and I really like listening to both of them, but there's something less memorable about the songs on those albums for whatever reason. I listened to it once, I really enjoy it, and a week later it's gone. These songs stick with me a lot more for whatever reason, and whether that's to do with the better production or whether they're just, better crafted songs, I'm not really too sure. But yeah, it's a great album because it sounds like Rush. I remember there was a whole lot of excitement when it came out, and of course Rush was a fairly old band at that point, but I remember thinking, wow, they've still got so much energy. It still sounds like a fresh band. In the Rush documentary, Jack Black refers to it as a band with an awful lot of rocket sauce. And, you know, even at this stage in their career, they were still dripping sauce out of that bottle. Yeah, the title is kind of a bizarre thing. The title in the album cover, it's a reference to an old board game that is kind of like a precursor to Snakes and Ladders. Or Snakes and Ladders, rather, not Snakes and Ladders. And the album cover is kind of a representation of that board game itself, which is really, really cool. If you have the vinyl, you could actually play it, I would think. I'm assuming that, you know, the snakes send you down and the arrows send you up. So that's kind of interesting. Kind of reflectant in the lyrics. Reflectant, I'm not sure if that's a word, but I just said it. Here it says the lyrics are largely to do with, you know, meditations on faith and whatnot, and that's cool. There's a real strong set of lyrics on here. Again, that's what makes the song so memorable and so good. There's some of them almost have like a permanent waves sort of optimism to it and earnestness. So again, in that regard, that's a very classic Rush sort of thing. Anyway, we'll move this video along and let's try talking about the tracks here. So it opens with Far Cry, and as I was saying, the good stuff is at the beginning of the album. Far Cry is certainly one of the best songs on the album. You know, great intro. I love that. You know, right off the bat, we get the acoustic guitar on top of the heavy guitar, so we get that nice blend, and it gets that real organic, natural sound. It's almost rustic. It's a great sound. But I love that syncopated intro. Dun 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. That's kind of a classic Rush thing, you know. That's a little reminiscent to the proggy stuff, and then we get the cool riff, do 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 do, and you know, kicks right off into the verse, and I mean, right away you get the sense of, you know, they really honed these songs down, and they really took a lot of time into arranging them, and it's just fantastic. Far Cry is an excellent song. Very, very strong chorus. You know, it's a far cry from the world we thought we'd inherit. That's a real powerful moment. And live, of course, all the pyro came out during Far Cry, and Far Cry is the one song from the album that they played every single tour afterwards. So that's certainly saying something. It was also like the lead-off single, so I think they knew that was the hot tamale that they had on their hands. But yeah, just a great track. It's a classic Rush sound. It's a classic Rush song, and it opens the album brilliantly and gets you set up for a Rush experience, which is followed through with the second track, Armor and Sword. Another really, really good song. This is a great blend of that kind of proggy thing with the very melodic thing. It's a great blend of that traditional songwriting style, and that there's a great hook, you know, that you know, nobody gets to their heaven without a fight, and that little guitar like boom doo 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 doo. And that's you know, very incessant through the song. It's repeated quite heavily, so it's, you know, that's the melodic sense. But then there's also a great variation in the tone of the song, you know. I really love the little acoustic passages that start out. That's that rustic sound coming through again. And that part kind of reminds me of the classic 70s Rush, those acoustic moments where it's just Lifeson on the acoustic and Geddy singing along. But there's also lots of great heavy crunching riffs. There's almost, you know, a Black Sabbath influence with some of the riffs on there. And even like the bridge, there's kind of a long winding bridge that's got that real, you know, sour, nasty guitar lick that's just really cool, or that riff. It's very Doom-like almost, but very, you know, again, it's that earnest lyrics as well, you know, that line, nobody gets to their heaven without a fight, you know, that's, you know, there's a spiritual vibe to that whole thing. So yeah, Armor and Sword is a great track. We carry on, track 3, Workin' Them Angels. Contender for the best song on the album for me. I think this is a great track. And very simple for Rush standards, you know. This is what I mean about that, you know, great talent for songwriting is on perfect showcase on this. Everything is there. It's got the, you know, great swinging verse that intrigues you and brings you in. It's got the wonderful kind of pre-chorus, and there's a little reference to moving pictures, you know, memories strumming at the heart of a moving picture. And those little pre-choruses are just fantastic. And again, the acoustic guitar comes in, we get that lush, organic sound. And the chorus is just thumping too. You know, it is a songwriting song, but it's a heavy rock song as well. I love that. Working them angels, doom, 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 doom. It's and there's the little rhythmic variations of that as the song goes along. There's a couple of great Peart fills, which again, you know, they're reminiscent of the early days. You know, where the Geddy and Alex stop, and then Peart carries it away through a big long tom roll that goes all the way down. So you know, it's just great. You know, it is, you know, a simpler Rush song, but it is just damn fantastic. One of my favorites on the album. I guess it could be one of my favorite modern day Rush songs. I would say it's just fantastic. It was the one that was included on the Retrospective 3 as well from this album, so that's notable. We carry on to track 4, The Larger Bowl, a Pantoum. I think that's how you pronounce that word. And this is an okay track. It's not as good as the first 3. The first 3 are a real, you know, boom, 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 you know, 3 great songs right in a row. And Larger Bowl is, you know, pretty good. Again, very much in that traditional songwriting kind of style. It does have a few heavy moments, but it is very folky in a sense. And this is one of the darker songs too. You know, the repeating stanza that comes back. Such a lot of pain on the earth. You know, that again, there's an earnestness to that as well, which is classic Rush. That's part of what Peart does so well. But it's not one of my favorites on the album. You know, it's not one that I would skip by any means. But I wouldn't be able to skip on this anyway because it's final. But it's an okay track. We move on to track 5, Spindrift. Now this is another really great track. This is the second single that was released, but I don't think it did as well as Far Cry. But I really like it. It's a good, you know, classic heavy Rush song. I love that big riff. Boom, doom, 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 doom. And Peart cuts through with that very direct, straight up rhythm. Boom, ta, boom, boom, ta, boom, boom. Which is fantastic. And you know, again, it's kind of got that proggy thing because there's lots of ups and downs to it. There's almost a Genesis kind of vibe, you know, almost like a Trick of the Tail vibe to parts of it. I think of Squonk, actually, for whatever reason. That's a very obscure thing to think of. But I get a little bit of that with Spindrift, and that's good, and that's great. Then we get to track 6. We get the first instrumental of the 3 on the album, The Main Monkey Business. Now this is the instrumental that is more in the traditional sense of Rush instrumentals, and it is fantastic. You know, compared to the other instrumentals, it's there's a very much an emphasis on the atmosphere of it. You know, it's what I like about Main Monkey Business over a lot of the '90s instrumentals, and you know, even YYZ. I like YYZ more than Monkey Business, but what I think is really cool about it that isn't really common with a lot of their other instrumentals is that it's much more, you know, dependent on the atmosphere. There's less chops, and it's more, you know, like, you know, Lifeson's big melodic line that comes in there. You know, there's only just a precious few notes to it, but it's so powerful, and like I said, it creates this great atmosphere, and you know, it's a song that takes its time. You know, it's a solid 6 minutes, and it goes through all kinds of different sections, and it winds up to some really, you know, great high energy moments, and again, like some of the more atmospheric moments as well. So yeah, Main Monkey Business is a fantastic song. And it is with this song that I formally, you know, retract anything I said in the previous videos about my favorite Rush instrumentals and trying to list them all, because that's a futile exercise. They're all really, really great, and they're all very unique, so, you know what, they're all very good. Main Monkey Business might be the closest thing they got to the classic 70s instrumentals, though, arguably, just because it's longer and it takes its time, and, you know, the passages kind of creep up on you, so, yeah, great track, and it's one that they played live quite a bit as well. I saw them play Monkey Business twice, and both times were awesome. We carry on to track 7, The Way the Wind Blows. So we're still in the very, very high quality portion of the album at this point. This is a great song. Kind of comparable to Armor and Sword, because there's a huge variety in the tone of the song. You know, that opening, that big bluesy you know, it's not the same as like the early Rush stuff, you know, the self-titled album with that bluesiness, but it is a very bluesy lick that kicks it off, and it's kind of got a really urgent, heavy riff for the verse. It almost sounds a little bit like one of the riffs that's in Main Monkey Business, actually. But it's kind of got this heavy driving, you know, urgency to it. You know, great lyrics. So it's come to this. Da 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 da. I can't quote it all right now. But when it gets to the chorus, it's almost like a different song, but it transitions very smoothly. But the chorus is very much a folky thing, and it's one of those great melodic moments on the album. You know, I love that. We can only grow the way the wind blows. That's just a wonderful moment, and you know, it's memorable. You know, you hear that, and it stays with you for quite a while. And again, I love the whole dynamic change going from the heavy verse to the melodic, folky chorus, and the blues lick comes back at one point. So yeah, it's another one of the highlight tracks on the album. Still very much in the high quality end of the album for me. We carry on to track 8. We get Hope. Second instrumental. The instrumentals on this album are great because the album is quite long, you see. It's over an hour long, and the instrumentals are great because they break the songs up and they kind of divide the album into different sections, which is, you know, it eases the listening experience. It makes the long album length, you know, acceptable, if you like. But yeah, Hope is a great track. It's just Alex Lifeson guitar solo, just on I think just on a 12-string, I think. And it's fantastic. We've never really heard a moment like that with Alex on an acoustic guitar since the 70s, doing a solo of all things. It's kind of got a Celtic vibe of, you know, and that rustic, that traditional sort of vibe. But it's still, you know, there's lots of chops to it. It's only 2 minutes. It's just this quick little interlude, like I said, to lead you to the next section of the album. But it's fantastic, and it's good to hear, you know, a bit more of, you know, Lifeson displaying his chops. Because if there's one thing I've noticed is, you know, I've been listening to the albums all the way through, is we do hear less and less of the Alex Lifeson guitar solo as we go deeper into the catalog. So that's kind of interesting, and you know, for that reason, Hope is a really, really good thing to have, I would say. Anyway, moving on to the next song, we get Faithless. This is the one where I would probably say is my least favorite on the album. There's nothing wrong with it. You know, again, it's Rush in the traditional songwriting sense. The chorus just doesn't do it for me for whatever reason. You know, it's a very slow-paced number, and you know, if the song was maybe a minute and a half shorter, I would think it was much stronger. But the chorus is just a little da 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 da, and it just kind of keeps going. But like I said, there's nothing wrong with it. That's just my taste coming out. The verses are really, really cool. There's a sort of brooding sense to the verses, but of course, isn't my favorite. I'm sure that a lot of people really like that because it's a strong set of lyrics. I like the lyrics on Faithless quite a bit. The music just didn't quite capture me. Anyway, we're gonna move on to track 10, I believe. I can't tell because there's no numbers on these tracks, and I'm under too much pressure to talk to do the proper math. The next track is Bravest Face. So we're in like the lesser part of the album, I would say. You know, that's heralded in with Faithless, I guess. But it's still a really, really good track, actually. It's just not quite up to the same quality as, you know, Far Cry, Armor and Sword, Workin, Them Angels, Spindrift, Monkey Business. You know, it's not quite up to that caliber. But it is really, really good, and I like it's got the blend of acoustic, and I like the acoustic verses towards the beginning, and then the heavy chorus as well. I really like how when it kind of gets to the main chorus, we get the chorus delivered as a heavy arrangement, and then a much quieter sort of bluesy, folky arrangement, and then it goes heavy again towards the end. So that's kind of a cool little trick of arranging there. And speaking of Alex Lifeson guitar solos, there's a fantastic little solo by Lifeson on Bravest Face, and again, he's in that bluesy kind of mood. There's almost a moment where I swear he does a little Jimi Hendrix lick, which is kind of cool. So yeah, Bravest Face is you know, a good part of the second half of the album. And we move on to Good News First, track 11. Pretty good song. The thing that I really like about it is that guitar lick in the verse. It's just kind of sneaky in the background there, but it's just this really nice little, you know, cherry on top of the arrangement, which is really, really good. The song itself is a good song. It's not an outstanding song, but it is a good song by Rush. The real highlight for me, though, like I said, is that little guitar lick. It's all about Lifeson, man. We'll move on. We're taking up too much time right now. Track 12, Malignant Narcissism. That's not an easy word to say 10 times fast. Malignant Narcissism. Great track. This is the third instrumental on the album, and this is a moment of awesome that they just happened to capture on tape right at the last second. I think I remember reading the story about it, and Peart, for whatever reason, just had a traditional 5-piece drum kit, just a couple of toms and a snare and a couple of cymbals, And I think they just thrashed it out as a quick little improv, and, you know, thank God they had it. I think maybe they improvised it once, and then they just wrote it in an afternoon, and someone just pressed record, and then it meant, you know, thankfully they decided to put it on the album. But it is really, really good. You know, it is that crazy, over-the-top playing style of, you know, the 70s Rush, and it's great that they, like I said, that they captured it and put it on the album. You know, it's just frantic. Of course, the title is a reference to Team America, and then it pops up, you know, we've got a case of Malignant Narcissism, blah, 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 blah. But yeah, it's got that thrashy license style, and then, you know, Lee and Peart trade some fills back and forth, which is very much a YYZ sort of thing. It's just a shame that it's only 2 minutes long. It's such a short little track. But it is a classic Rush instrumental. It's fantastic, and it's almost, you know, that might be the reason why I kept forgetting about it when I was talking about the other Rush instrumentals, because it's just this quick little 2-minute slice, but it's a moment of awesome, and it's you know, one of the highlights of the album, actually. Even though it's just so tiny, it is one of the highlights. And then finally we move on to the final track of the album, track 13, "We Hold On." And this is a good song. You know, again, it's not the big crazy wind up that we used to get back in the 70s, but it belongs at the end of the album. It's almost like a mantra in a way. It's very, very simple. The arpeggiated guitar part that's at the beginning pretty much lasts through the entire song, and it's just you know, articulated to be heavy and quieter, you know, depending on whether it's at the verse or the chorus or whatever. But the lyrics are kind of a cool thing. You know, it's just kind of, you know, acknowledging the fact that, you know, we could have called it quits so many times in the past, but we hold on and we keep going forward. So it's kind of, there's a sentimental sort of a vibe, which wraps the album up fairly nicely. But it is a very simple, quick little thing that caps the album off, rather than a big epic grand finale. But that's okay. At the end of the day, it's still a fantastic album. It's you know, even like I said, it's a very memorable record, but I haven't listened to it in years and years. And when I was you know, thinking about it, I figured, yeah, Vapor Trails and then Clockwork Angels, and then this one's going to be a little bit lesser, but I really can't say that because it is terrific. You know, it's you know, I would put it on a higher regard than the 90s Rush albums. I would argue that much anyway. But it's not about a competition. We're just chatting about the albums, aren't we? That's right. That's right. And I've chatted far too long about this, so I'm going to try and wrap this video up. Thank you very much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe and like and this and that, comment, join in the conversation, and we will see you in the future. For the grand finale, I will be talking about Clockwork Angels next, so stay tuned for that. You will see me in the future. Take care.